Hello, and welcome to the Smile Revolution show. And I am Princess Wow, also known as Mindy Fradkin. Anyway, I always say that may you give and receive many smiles because there's a lot of challenges, of course, but if you can focus on the good, it will help you smile. Anyway, we're going to get right into my show. So, Keanan Duffty is a New York-based British designer, singer-songwriter, academic, and member of the Council of Fashion Designers of America. Duffty is co-author of Rebel Rebel, Anti-Style with Paul Gorman and B.P. Fallon for Rizzoli Adelita 2009, and author of The Fashion Entrepreneur, came out in 2024 with through Hachette. Duffty earned a Bachelor of Arts degree with first-class honors from Central St. Martin's in London, and during his studies, his work was regularly featured in the Face, ID, and Blitz magazine, photographed by Nick Knight, Peter Ashworth, Mark Laban, and Ian McKell. Hope I'm saying everybody's name right. Anyway, he's a fashion, let's see, there's so much to say. From 99 to 2010, Keanan's fashion collections took center stage at New York Fashion Week with a global presence in 150 premier retailers, including Bergdorf Goodman, Bloomingdales, Barneys in New York, Harvey Nichols and Harrods in London, Lane Crawford in Hong Kong. It goes on and on and on. 2001, Duffty and his wife, Nancy Garcia, opened a design studio in New York's SoHo district and a Slinky Vagabond retail store at 50 Spring Street in Nolita. It goes on and on. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his music. He debuted on the music scene in the early 80s and has since recorded 8 studio albums. Duffty co-founded Slinky Vagabond alongside Rock and Roll Hall of Fame members Glenn Matlock from Sex Pistols, Clem Burke from Blondie, and Earl Slick from David Bowie and John Lennon. Their debut performance was May 2007, alongside with the New York Dolls at the Joey Ramone birthday bash. Anyway, it goes on and on. I think that gives you an idea about my guest tonight, and whether you're seeing it live on replay, it's very inspiring, and enjoy. Hi, Keanan.
Hey, Mindy, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Anyway, how I start my shows, I always talk about how I meet my guest.
Sure.
So I connected with you through Earl Slick.
Yeah.
Who I made hats for recently. And for my audience who doesn't know, not everybody knows who he is because he's a side person. So he is a legendary guitarist for David Bowie, John Lennon, and many more.
Yeah.
And in Slinky Vagabond.
Indeed. Well, yeah.
Right, which is your band.
I go way back. So
you go 29 years, you said.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. So anyway, so really good to meet you. And your career is so unusual, as everybody I'm sure says. So it's so interesting how you've combined 2 careers, and I don't know how you do it all because I'm sure, but your main thing really, is it your main thing, your fashion?
I've made a living through doing fashion. So
right.
That's kind of the main way that I define my craft.
Right, exactly.
You know, and it's been good to me, and I'm lucky that I can still do it after all these years, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. So you so you're from you're from London or outside London.
Yeah, from Yorkshire actually, but I moved to London when I was a kid to study in art school and to get a record deal and do all that good stuff. So I kind of my growing up was done in Yorkshire, but my formative defining years were really in London, and I was in London for 11 years. And then moved to New York in '93. So I've been in America actually for longer than I lived in England. So I'm more of an American than I am a Brit at this stage, I think.
Well, how did you get to New York?
Well, I came here illegally.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, I came here illegally, which I love saying because, I mean, my wife always corrects me and says, no, you didn't come here illegally. But I came here on a tourist visa with an intention to stay, and to stay for a few years. And I was lucky to land a job very quickly that provided me with a working visa, and then eventually that led to, you know, permanent residency and all the rest of it. But I came here with the intention of being in America for a couple of years, and you know, 30 odd years later, I'm still here. So it's obviously home.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so your background is you went to Central St. Martin's, which is an art school, right?
Yeah.
And you studied fashion, but you were also in the whole punk scene, right? You were still playing. You were doing music too.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a small town in the north of England, and when I was a teenager, I was in a punk band called Sordid Details, and I was seeing at that time a lot of glamorous young people in the Sunday supplement magazines. And it always said that they went to St. Martin's. Everybody that looked great went to St. Martin's. And I thought, okay, I should go there. That's the place. Everybody looks great and they're all doing interesting stuff. And it was very furtive because a lot of people that came out of St. Martin's during that era, you know, the very famous ones are people like John Galliano, Sade, and then people like, you know, Dylan Jones, who became ultimately the editor-in-chief of GQ in England for like 20 odd years in the Sunday Times magazine, and now is the editor of the Evening Standard newspaper. So there are all those people, but then there are people like Isaac Julian, who's an amazing art filmmaker who currently has an installation. Well, I just saw some of his work actually in MoMA, but he had an installation in LACMA last year, which was, in the Academy of Motion Pictures, which was fantastic. So, you know, there are a lot of people that used it as a cultural, you know, educational melting pot, and a way to be funded, actually, because I'm really, I never take this for granted. I'm really lucky that I went to school in an era when the government gave you a grant to go and learn. And that's why England was and remains to be such a creative hotbed, because it supports that talent. You
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, not anymore, because it just, you know, like everywhere, it became, it wasn't maintainable. I see your cat behind you here.
I know. He's never done this before. Okay.
Yeah, my cat's probably going to join me in a second.
Okay, that's really funny. Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, and I've always really believed that education is very, very important for every human being to have access to. So, you know, everybody has a library in their hometown. Everybody has a library on their computer or on their phone. So, you know, dig into it and learn and discover things that you didn't know you were interested in. It's always an important thing. So, yeah, so I was lucky to go through that whole period. And, you know, I went to college with a lot of people that really inspired me and influenced me. And during college, there were many people that were coming into the coffee bar in St. Martin's and using it as their little office, like Jerry Dammers from The Specials, Holly Johnson from Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Even at the height of their fame, they were coming into St. Martin's because they had friends on various courses there, and they would use it as a place to escape from the public, you know, so they weren't bothered by people, because everybody else all my contemporaries were too cool to speak to anybody famous. So they left them alone, you know. So it was a great time. Yeah.
So that was the 80s?
Yeah, I moved to London in 82. And I was in college until 86. So I did a 4-year Bachelor of Arts degree course. And, you know, I moved there when I was 18, left when I was 22. So, you know, they're kind of defining times. And I got a record deal during that time. So when I was in college, I had a record deal and had a great manager. And I kind of realized how difficult it was to have a career in music and how difficult it was to make money. Because I had a great manager who was very fair and kind. And even with that, you know, there are all these stories of people getting ripped off, but, you know, I wasn't ripped off at all. But even with that, I realized that, you know, it's a tough business. So.
It is. Yeah. So you ended up, but you did. Okay. Now, the Slinky Vagabond. Now, when did that's your band that you formed, that you started that band?
Well, actually, yeah. So when I moved to England, in order to get sponsored for a green card, I mean, this always comes back to like my immigration status. In order to get sponsored for a green card, well, actually not for a green card, but for a working visa, I incorporated a company called Slinky Vagabond, and that comes from a lyric in David Bowie's Young Americans. And I just chose.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I just chose it abstractly because you couldn't use my name because then it would be obvious I was sponsoring myself. So I chose this name.
Okay, I see.
And giving away all the secrets here, folks.
I didn't know that was okay. Yeah, it's a great name. Okay.
Yeah, so I chose that, and then that became a name that I used. I used it initially for the name of my fashion line. I used it for the name of a couple of musical projects that I did, albums that I recorded and stuff. And then when I met Slicky, we met because
we're all Slick. I know he's got a lot of names. I know I call him Slick. You call him Slicky. I know.
I call him Slick or Slicky. Nobody calls him Earl. I mean, like, I don't know who calls him Earl. But when I met him Earl.
yeah, go on.
Yeah, well, people that really know him don't.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So when we met, it was through MySpace, and I had some music that I'd posted, and we got together to talk about recording it properly. And then in doing that, I'd gotten to know, the late great Clem Burke, who's a dear friend, and an amazing talent. And I also knew Glenn Matlock, who's again a dear friend. So I asked both of them if they would be willing to play on these recordings.
Okay.
And that was really the formative time of how Slick and I met and how Americans. And I just chose.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah. I just chose it abstractly because you couldn't use my name because then it would be obvious I was sponsoring myself. So I chose this name.
Okay, I see.
And giving away all the secrets here, folks.
I didn't know that was okay. Yeah, it's a great name. Okay.
Yeah, so I chose that, and then that became a name that I used. I used it initially for the name of my fashion line. I used it for the name of a couple of musical projects that I did, albums that I recorded and stuff. And then when I met Slicky, we met because
we're all Slick. I know he's got a lot of names. I know I call him Slick. You call him Slicky. I know.
I call him Slick or Slicky. Nobody calls him Earl. I mean, like, I don't know who calls him Earl. But when I met him Earl.
yeah, go on.
Yeah, well, people that really know him don't.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So when we met, it was through MySpace, and I had some music that I'd posted, and we got together to talk about recording it properly. And then in doing that, I'd gotten to know, the late great Clem Burke, who's dear friend, and an amazing talent. And I also knew Glenn Matlock, who's again a dear friend. So I asked both of them if they would be willing to play on these recordings.
Okay.
And that was really the formative time of how Slick and I met, and how he actually really met Glenn. And and really he knew Clem through the industry, and they'd lived on the same street in LA, but they didn't really know each other. So we all became, close through that project. And that was 20 years ago now.
That was like 2007.
Well, Slick and I met. I think Slick and I met in 2006. I mean, he said 29 years. I don't think it's that long, but Slick and I met in 2006. I'd known Glenn before then, and I'd known Clem before then as well. So the project actually started properly in 2007 when we recorded.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, we were invited to support the New York Dolls for the Joey Ramone birthday bash. So we needed a name, and I just suggested Slinky Vagabond. And
that's cool. I love the name. It's great.
Yeah, it's fun. It's. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge Bowie fan. I think both Clem and Glenn Matlock are Bowie fans too, and obviously Slick, he's probably one of the longest serving with David. So
I know, right? Yeah, I just met Glenn recently when I was in London.
Right.
Yeah. So
Glenn's great.
Yeah, he's great. He's really neat. Anyway, but you knew Bowie. You knew Bowie, and did you do clothing with him? Didn't you do costumes for him?
His stylist and also the archivist of the Bowie archive and his photographer is a gentleman called Jimmy King, who I knew Jimmy from the 90s, and he used to. I had a showroom on Broadway and used to come to the showroom and borrow stuff for David or for the band or whatever. But the most significant thing that I ever saw David wear was a deep kind of wine red shirt with a black cross on it, which he wore after a show in 2000. And it's a very significant photograph. Because he's photographed with Iman, who was heavily pregnant. It was right before their daughter was born. It's a really joyous picture. It's an amazing picture. And it was kind of around the time when David, I think, sort of started re-embracing his heritage, So it was kind of it sounds cheesy, but it was a rebirth for them as a family, a birth for them as a family, and a rebirth creatively, I think, for him. So I kind of, he'd worn stuff a little bit. And then I approached Bill Zisblatt, who's David's manages the estate now, but obviously managed David's, business affairs and touring and all of that, because I wanted to do merch for the tours. And that was around the time of the reality tour. And then obviously David had health issues and decided to stop touring. So nothing came of it. And then with my own line, I struck a deal with Target. And
that's amazing.
So I went back to David. Yeah. So I went back to David's, Bill at that point. Because I thought it was financially worthwhile, a project for David to get involved with. Also intriguing, because it was very, very much a Warholian, mass merchandise thing. And David was interested. So that's kind of how it started. And then we did this collection, and it was very successful, I think, on all sides.
Yeah, that's great. And I saw that you had, I don't know when you did this, but your dolls fashion show, that is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
That was
a long time ago.
Yeah. That's
2003. And we did it because I'd had a deal with Reebok for a few years, and we were producing a co-branded sneaker collection. And part of that deal was they were paying for my runway shows at New York Fashion Week. And then the deal ended, and I didn't have any money to do a show. So I came up with this idea to remake the whole collection in miniature and put it on Barbie dolls and have them go down a conveyor belt. And
I saw that, and I was like, that was amazing. And I don't know if you knew this, but I have dolls in my own likeness.
Right. Yeah.
And this one was made in London.
Fantastic.
This is me. And John Lee Bird made this one, but I have a collection of dolls in my likeness. Anyway, this one was a gift because he made an Earl Slick doll.
Right.
You know about that? Okay, so
I've seen some of these pictures online. So I
saw it, yeah. So I was like on my way to London, and I was like picking up the Earl Slick doll, and I got that doll. So anyway, in the meantime, right now though, you're working on an event this week.
Yeah.
To help.
Yeah. So well, actually, I'm very, very honored and very fortunate and privileged to be involved with an organization called Education Through Music, which provides education for New York City schools, and has been in existence since 1991. It was supported by the Quincy Jones Foundation and Renee Fleming and other very, seasoned and legendary, impactful musicians. And they are honoring me with an award at their gala on Thursday. So I'm going to be getting up and doing a few songs with the All Hallows School rock band, which is All Hallows is up in the Bronx. Sadly, the school is closing at the end of this academic year because of funding. They're kind of struggling with funding. So very, very wonderful program of rock music isn't taught that much in schools. It's more traditional orchestras and woodwind, brass sections.
Right, yeah.
But I think it's really good to have rock music as part of the educational process because it builds students' confidence, it builds their presence. It gets them used to getting out and expressing themselves and working cohesively as a unit. Dealing with personalities and all that good stuff. And I was telling the lads, I was rehearsing with them yesterday, and I was telling them that in the rehearsal room, it kind of took me back to when I was a kid playing in my parents' garage with my punk band. That's the most magical time. And, it's actually the most creative because there's nothing really on your shoulders other than making this terrible noise together.
Right.
And my mum and dad, who are, fortunately still around, they always remember those times, and they kind of, I think, loved it that we used to annoy the neighbors and make a real racket. But it was expression, it was like teenage expression, and it's a great way to get all your angst out, and it's a great way to be creative, so it's a magical time.
So you have your events, it's a fundraiser?
It's a fundraiser on Thursday, the 15th of March. Sorry, of May. I'm still in March. Yeah. It's been a busy year. And it's in New York City, and it's on Park Avenue. And we'll be honoring another gentleman called Frank Alvedero, who's the head of the Enterprise Project for real estate. So, we have two honorees, myself and Frank, and there's going to be a number of school orchestras that are playing. And then the big finish to the evening is we're going to do a bit of, we're going to take everybody back to CBGBs.
Really?
Well, yeah, no, metaphorically.
Literally, metaphorically, yeah.
We're going to do a couple of rock and roll tunes, and we're going to make them dance on the tables.
Right, that's really cool.
Yeah,
that's really neat. And so, let's see, what else I'm going to ask you. Now, how did you get into meeting? Well, you said you met Slick on online.
Yeah,
but you have like a huge. So I guess he and Glenn introduced you because you have a lot of Bowie alumni on your with your albums.
Yeah, we had sort of some more kind of, I guess, more mainstream alumni. Like I had a record out in January that has Mike Garson playing keys, a couple of tracks, and Ava Cherry, and I actually met Ava two summers ago. We did a Bowie convention in New York, the sort of global Bowie fan convention.
Right.
And she was singing several songs herself, and I invited her to come and sing Jean Genie with me do it as a duet. We hit it off, and she's great. So I asked her if she would sing on one of the tracks on this new record, and then Mike very kindly, agreed to play keys on a couple of tracks, and he does his magical Aladdin Sane discordant jazzy stuff on one track. But I've worked with people, like I did a record 4 or 5 years ago, and it had David Torn on it, who played, some very ethereal, wonderful, his kind of abstract guitar, which I love. And he's played with many other greats. David, who played on Heathen and some other albums too.
Right.
Yeah. So, it's always, I don't want to overdo it. By working with too many Bowie folks, because we're sort of not a Bowie tribute band, even though I'm a huge fan, obviously.
Yeah.
But we're not a tribute band, and nobody can do what David did anyway. If you try and do it, you just sound like not even third rate. So, it's better to just kind of try and do your own thing.
So right now you're just a duet. I mean, you have one other musician, right? It's mostly the two of you.
Yeah, so I work with a guy called Fabio Fabri, who I met in Italy almost 10 years ago now. I was doing a lecture at a fashion school in Florence. They invited me to go to Florence to do this lecture. And so to kind of amp it up a bit, I asked them, can I bring a friend of mine with me? And so I brought Glenn Matlock. Okay. And we actually talked about, during college, I worked in a retail store in London. And it was a very significant retail store that was very famous during that whole 80s period.
Which one was that?
During the New Romantic era. It was where it's called PX, and it was a store, Stephen Jones, who I'm sure you know, making hats. He had hats in the basement, and Steve Strange from Visage had worked there. Princess Julia, the very famous London DJ, had worked there. So I worked there with my friend Rose Turner, who you may know her son. He's Callum Turner, who's the amazing young British actor. He's being considered as one of the replacements for Daniel Craig as James Bond, and I hope he gets it. It would be amazing. He would be great. And so I worked there, and then for the lecture, I wanted to talk about that because I think it's really important for kids to, you know, be part of the scene and get involved with stuff. And great way to do that is working at retail. And Glenn worked in Vivian's shop, and he hung and he did all of that, printed a lot of the t-shirts. So
I read one of his autobiographies. Yeah,
so I wanted him to talk about, and I really ended up interviewing him about that. And you know, Glenn's great; he tells great stories, and so
he does. He's a great storyteller. Yeah.
And then afterwards, and you know, the school treated us really well. They took us to Florence, put us in a nice hotel. We were there for a few days. And after the lecture, a guy came up to me and said, "Oh, my name's Fabio. You know, I have a recording studio, and I'd love for you to come by. Maybe we could, you know, play some music together and so on." So we did, and we really hit it off as friends. You know, became really good friends, and also found we were actually really good musical collaborators because we are very good at kind of sharing the creative process. And, you know, when we're kind of middle-aged blokes, there's nothing to prove.
Right. Okay, yeah.
Like not too much ego involved. So we just thought, let's throw it all into a pot and make some music. And we did. And we're still doing it years later. So, you know, it works. We're just working on an acoustic record at the moment. And
but he's based in Italy still, right? He's
based in Italy. He's had a long career, you know, very successful in the music industry in Italy. He had a deal with Warner's. He's played, you know, done a lot of stuff in obviously music, but he's also worked doing soundtracks of fashion shows and that kind of thing. So again, there's a bit of a fashion music crossover with Fabio too.
That's neat.
Yeah, we have a little bit of synergy, and his son is also a musician. So, you know, it's great because there's, you know, there's a kind of shared experience between all of us. So yeah, it's really cool. And we decided to do this project right before the pandemic. So we kind of got a lot of music in the bag, and we were sort of finishing it up, not really knowing what to do with it. And then I said to Fabio, look, why don't I contact people that, you know, I know in the industry and ask them if they'll guest on things. And so on that first record, we had Midgior, who is like one of the co-founders of Live Aid and Ultra and so on. Dave Formula from Magazine and Visage. I mean, a whole bunch of people, you know, great players. And that's become a little bit of a formula. It was a formula actually when we were doing Slinky Vagabond with Slicky and Glenn and Clem, because we also had Pete Shelley singing on. We did a cover of Bowie's Boys Keep Swinging, and we had Pete singing on the choruses of that. So there's always been that aspect of you know, I always want to work with people that I really admire, and you know, the creative process, you know, has been one that they've really inspired me. So if I get a chance to work with people, I'll always go for it. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. Your career is amazing. Anyway, but I want to say, like with your fashion, I mean, you've sold to Bergdorf's and sold all over the world, right? Yeah. So with your music though, did you take music? I mean, are you officially
how
to do music?
So my mum and dad thought I should learn to play piano. My mum's a piano player. They thought I should learn to play piano. They sent me for piano lessons, and I liked it, but it didn't really connect with it. And so then they sort of said, well, what do you want to play? And I said guitar. So they kind of got me set up with classical guitar, and with a young teacher who sort of had his own rock band, but he was teaching me classical guitar. And you know, he said, well, what do you really want to play? And it was at the time a punk. And I said, well, I want to play what the Sex Pistols are playing. And he said, oh, you just need to learn the bar chord and you can play everything that every punk band's ever played. And he taught me that, and it was a way off to the races. I repainted my classical guitar black and like, you know, took the nylon strings off it and put metal strings on, which ruined it because you can't do that with the classical guitar. But that was, you know, it was very rudimentary. But then, you know, from actual lessons and learning how to read music and everything, I was then in the garage with my mates, just like banging out, you know, anything. We learned to play I Want to Be Your Dog by the Stooges, which is pretty simple. And then we started writing I started writing tunes for the band, you know, because we needed songs to play. And punk was fantastic because there were no rules. So you could just do whatever you wanted to do.
Right.
you know, and you could be terrible and it didn't matter because people would, you know, like you if you were terrible.
Right. But you always had your parents had a hair salon, so you were all about. I know your whole.
Yeah, I'm all about hair.
It's all about your hair and style.
I still have hair, so that's amazing. After dyeing it
right.
from 14 years old, yeah. Well, actually, it was my mum. My mum at one point had 3 hair salons in a small town in the north of England, which is pretty amazing.
Wow.
And my dad also, he came out. They both left school when they were 14, so you know they were not formally educated people.
Oh, wow.
They're very, you know, they're entrepreneurial in terms of what their spirit, and they're always self-taught, and you know they're amazing people because they've had great success, and obviously, I mean, they've probably, you know, had all the challenges that we all have too, but they kind of empowered me, I think, to even when they probably didn't really understand what I was trying to do, you know, but they empowered me to follow that, you know, just follow it and go for it. And they've always, you know, been applauded my successes and commiserated my failures. So, you know, you can't ask for more than that, really.
Yeah, that's great. Did you learn a lot about business at school, or was it more inspired by your family?
Well, I think I saw I saw my mum and dad have success doing their own thing.
Right.
And I think I mean, I've had jobs in my life.
Right.
And some jobs that I've really enjoyed. I mean, when I left St. Martin's, I was making stuff in school and putting it in the window in school and selling it, you know, from the school.
Right.
And I tried to do that after I graduated for a year. And I didn't understand the mechanism of business. So I got a job, and I got a job with a company that had offices in New York and Tokyo. So they were sending me to New York and Tokyo. So I wouldn't have probably moved to America had I not had that experience.
Oh, I see. Was it a clothing store?
No, it was a design consultancy.
Oh.
And so we were working with stores like, I mean, back in the day, May Company, that don't really exist anymore, but May Company, Marshall Fields, Bloomingdales too. And so it sort of probably demystified that a little bit for me because, you know, this is pre-internet. So America seemed a long way away from the UK. And Japan at that time was really was the other side of the world. So to actually go there in the 80s was an amazing opportunity for a young person. And I think without that, you know, my life would have been pretty different. So I do really appreciate working for others is important, but I've been told that I'm completely unemployable because I just want to do my own thing. So that's probably true.
So anyway, so right now, what are you doing besides, I know your event this week, but are you doing a new line, or what exactly are you doing now?
Yeah, so I have a line. I have a lot of connections with Italy for some reason. I have a business partner who's also based in Florence. His name's Francesco. And he'd been badgering me for years to do another line. And I kind of consider myself to be a recovering fashion designer. And I've sort of been trying to get out of that industry for years. So I wasn't really doing it for a long time. And Francesco said, no, you should. You're a great designer. You should be doing stuff. So I said to him, okay, if you find a retail partner, I don't want to do wholesale. If you find a retail partner, or if you have a retail partner and they're interested, maybe we could do something. So last year he came to me with a retail partner, and I had a concept called the University of Failure, which is kind of making fun of all of the, you know, the challenges that education bring to you, but also the positivity of having a go at something. And if you fail, it doesn't matter because you learn from it. And so we launched that last year in 200 stores in the UK and Germany. And we have our summer deliveries that are going into store, I think either later this week or next week. And we're kind of off to the races with it. And the idea is to do something where, you know, once we really scale it, we can probably, you know, give part of the proceeds to a university hardship fund or something to help students. I love the idea of kids being able to go to college for nothing. I mean, very hard to provide that, but at least to provide some.
You're working towards, that's great.
So yeah. So and it's great to be doing that with a mate who he has production, he has factories in Italy, and they're completely they're as sustainable as you can be into today's manufacturing process. I mean, as soon as you have a truck rolling up and taking the goods away, you're using resources. So being probably more than 50% sustainable is really, really hard. But circular water system and all that kind of stuff, solar paneling, and so we're trying not to use too many resources. And Francesco's brilliant at this. It's a family business that they've been doing since the 60s. So they're very seasoned and they're very good. They make a beautiful product. Yeah.
So are you still? It's like, oh, sorry, go on.
No, so I'm doing that in fashion. Like I said, it's like the mafia. I was out and then they pulled me back in.
Right. So I know for years your music, I mean your music has inspired your fashion. So a lot of it is like influenced by punk. So is it still? Are you still doing that influence of punk in your new collection?
The spirit is, yeah. I mean,
right? Yeah.
The University of Failure, the idea, I created that because I teach with universities. I teach with the University of Southern California. Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre formed an academy there, and it's for innovation and entrepreneurship. So I teach with them, and I'm building a whole fashion program for them, which we're going to launch in 2026.
Oh, great.
And so I'm in California a lot.
Oh, okay.
And so, yeah, I really believe that, it's important in the creative process to move beyond where you're comfortable. And failure doesn't matter because you're going to learn from it. As long as it doesn't negatively impact other people, you're going to learn from it. And by negatively impacting other people, I mean, don't do something that's going to be a huge financial failure and is going to put people out of work, or, put people in duress, or you end up owing loads of money to people and stuff like that.
Right.
So be responsible and treat others how you want to be treated. Be a responsible entrepreneur, do the right thing. And yeah, so that's the idea with the fashion line, University of Failure. It's to kind of embrace those ideas, from like Samuel Beckett to David Duchovny. Everybody talks about failure. All the tech people talk about failure as being an important part of the process. And there's a punk rock thing to that as well, because, I knew Malcolm McLaren reasonably well, and I interviewed him once for a TV show, and he said he knew the Sex Pistols were going to fail. It was just a matter of how spectacular the failure would be. And obviously it was a very spectacular failure. So they really changed the nature of fashion and music and graphic design and film and everything in doing that, So I think there's an important factor to that. Unlike the current administration, which is failing magnificently and really negatively impacting other people, we don't want that, So
exactly.
The failure can be a sort of a positive one in a sense.
Okay.
And that's the punk rock ethos, I think. So.
Okay, great. And so, is there anything else to wrap this up? Is there anything else you want to mention? I mean, we can talk a little bit about style, because I know I saw you talk about how important style is. Yeah,
I mean, I think so. I will talk about Slicky and Gwen and Clem, because each one of those guys. I mean, I grew up and they were my heroes growing up. So. First of all, I'm really privileged to know these people, and secondly, they're great people.
They are, yeah.
And I love them. I mean, dearly, all three of them. And I got to L.A. the day after Clem passed, unfortunately. So, I didn't get to see him at the end, which is unfortunate. But when you look at Clem, his style was clearly defined from probably 1974. He kind of had that mod haircut and he had the kind of mod sensibility. Slick has always been the ultimate rock and roll star. He's always carried that personal style.
That look. He has his style. It changes over the years, but it's always has look.
It evolves, but the kind of nature of it, the energy's there, and that's true with Glenn too. His personal style transcends punk and everything he's ever done. There's a great film of him in The Rich Kids, which is his band after the Pistols, and he had this brilliant frilly shirt on. It was very kind of small faces, because the Rich Kids kind of had that small faces influence. And I said to him, "Where did you get that shirt?" And he said, "Oh, I just made it myself. I just sewed the frills on,
I didn't know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, these guys all have their own innate personal style.
Yeah.
And that's very important because fashion, I don't really like fashion because you saw with the Met Gala, there's a lot of people in really wacky outfits and they can't carry it because it's just not them. There are some people with great looks and they look fantastic, but you have to have the personal style, and style is something you have. It's not something that you follow.
Exactly.
So
right.
I think that's what's much more important. And I think every great designer, whether it's Giorgio Armani or Vivienne Westwood, they're great because their personal style it runs through everything they do, even if they evolve and change to sort of echo what's happening in the fashion world. And it's still their innate style is there, and that's why they're great designers. So it's I think personal style is the ultimate thing to have, really, and anybody can have that. You don't have to be a fashion plate. I see people in the street who look fantastic effortlessly. They're not trying, they just look great. So it's important.
So is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, I love your style. You have great style. You make those fantastic, you personally have a very distinctive, well-defined style. And, the hats that you've made that Slicky wears, I mean, I've seen hats that you make for others too, but the hats that you wear that you make that Slicky wears, he looks fantastic in them because it still has your signature, but it sort of blends beautifully with his own personal style.
Well, because we really collaborated. You know how he is. And he's a designer too. He makes his belts and his jewelry. So he's very specific. Yeah. So it wasn't easy, though, as I have to say, because it's him and I together collaborating.
Sure. Yeah. But it's important. Collaboration isn't always easy, but it's important because the outcome is actually better than the
definitely. Yeah.
The individuals will produce.
Yeah. But, it worked out great. I'm grateful. But, it's, how he is. So I was like,
He's very particular.
He's very particular. I said to him, you're so particular. I'm really stressed,
Listen, when he in the studio, he is the best. So I play instruments, but with that band, I sang. I mean, I'm not going to play guitar better than Slicky. I'm not going to play anything better than the other guys. So I just sang, and I wrote as well. But in the studio, and we've recorded many times with that lineup, but also separately as well. Yeah. Slick is a great producer, and he brings out of me vocally something that very few other people are able to do because he's very particular and he pinpoints exactly what he wants. Yeah. But what he wants is within your realm.
That you can do it, right?
You can do it. And it's like he doesn't make you into something that you're not. He's able to bring out something that you maybe didn't know you had, and that's a great creative. It's a designer, it's a producer, it's a creative, inspirational force. And he's great at that.
He's very good. And no, I agree because he's very respectful of your talent.
Yeah, absolutely.
You work with him, like he honors, he knows you're really talented and he just wants to bring out what he wants to,
Yeah.
So it's really, special to work with him.
It's the important thing, and I love that you have Smile behind you on the wall there. Being very influenced by punk, I love the positive aspect of punk rock. The nihilism and the negativity never really spoke to me. It's the can-do spirit, that I really loved. And I think that puts you in a place where you're respectful of everyone else. Yeah. You can be very forthright and you can have very opinionated views, and maybe they're not shared by the group that you work with. However, if people recognize that you're passionate about that and it's coming from a true place, they will respect that and they'll probably support you in it, even though it might not be necessarily 100% their viewpoint, but they'll go with you. And I think that's a really important lesson for young people to learn as creatives, potential creatives, whether they're trying to be a fashion designer or a commercial artist or a musician or whatever they're trying to do, hairdresser, it's like be opinionated because that's what people pay us to do is like have a point of view, but also be respectful of everyone else in the room. So, and smile.
And smile. Keep the joy.
Keep the joy. Yeah, it's a joyous thing creating.
It really is. So anyway, I'm so grateful that I got to meet you and
yeah, you too. Thanks
learn
for
more
reaching
about
out.
your career. You know,
Yeah, appreciate
It's
it. We'll meet in IRL in real life.
I would like that. That would be great.
Yeah.
So anyway, I honor you. I appreciate you, and I'm just so inspired by you and everything you do. Really,
you too. Thank you. Thank
really
you.
great. So thank you so much for spending time with me on my show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me.
It's really great. So anyway, we'll talk later, and thanks so much.
Take care.
Okay, you too.
Thank
Bye.
you.
It's called the Smile Revolution that comes, goes round and back to you. So smile, 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 a simple smile will do.